Welcome back to another video in our building your own version of Uber series. Now in the previous video we took the fairly unconventional step of building out our UI and our UX before we'd even laid out things like our databases or considered the logic of the app. In this video I'm going to return to order a little bit, get the database set up, and that's going to give us a solid foundation for going on and building the core workflows here on Uber. The other thing that I'm going to do is also make sure that our onboarding flow and our profile are wired up to the new data types and data fields that I'm going to add to our database now. Now this is quite a kind of complex I guess array of data that we're adding here. We've got a bunch of changes to make to users, we've got a few new collections to add, and the thing to keep in mind is this database is going to be shared with another Adalo app. We're also going to create another app for the driver of the Uber, and so the downside or the upside, depending on your point of view, of using a shared database between two different Adalo apps is you don't get two separate users. So we're not going to have a users database for riders and a users database for drivers. Now in most instances, and it's why I say it can be a good or a bad thing, in most instances this is a good thing. You want the same users logging in between apps, although clearly for us we kind of want riders and drivers to be very, very separate, which is why we're giving them their own app. So Adalo won't let us create two user databases. That's not the way it's set up, but what we can do is make some changes or make some fields or properties here in this database that will serve both users. So let's go ahead and start adding some stuff in here. Now I'm going to start with a really, really obvious one, which is a true and false field, a boolean, however you want to pronounce it. And I'm going to call this one as driver. And this is simply going to be a true or false field that tells us whether or not the user is a driver or not. The other thing that I'm going to do is start adding address information. Now, when you're building your own app here, you can make a decision between, is this app only going to work locally, for example, in your own city? Is it going to work, across the whole world like Uber does? Is it going to work across your country, but not every country? Depending on exactly how you want to set this up, you can specify what level of address you're going to go to. My recommendation is set a home street address, like something like 64 Zoo Lane. Set a home city, it might be London for example, could be Glasgow, could be New York City. And set a home country. My finding is that the Google Maps work best if you give it at least this information. Even if you don't let your user go any further than that, I find that this is the best level of information to give it. You could add in there zip code, postcode, whatever's relevant in your local geography, but these are the best for you to get started. And so we're going to do a couple of things here. We've just added the home address, the home city and the home country. These pieces of data are essentially going to figure out where does both a rider and a driver start their day. When you come to this location search screen that we built earlier, what is going to show up here in that top box. But the other thing that we need is to replicate those same address fields again, but for a current address. Now this is going to be more relevant to the driver, and we're not going to make a huge kind of use of this, but you could build out more functionality yourself. But essentially what we're going to say here is, once the driver has delivered a user from a pickup location to a destination location, they are no longer at their home address. We can no longer calculate a pickup based on their home address, and therefore we need to know their current address. So what we can do is, when the driver arrives at the destination with the user, and the user gets out the car and runs away to do whatever they're going to do, we can update the driver's current address with what the previous destination address was. So if I take you from 64 Zoo Lane to number 10 Downing Street, then my current address is going to update to number 10 Downing Street, because that's where I just dropped you off. And so ideally, as a driver, I now want the closest ride to me. Now we're not going to mess about too much. We're looking at the closest rides. There are ways to do it, and maybe one you can explore or ask about in the community, but we'll keep it a little bit simpler and just use this to figure out the next pickup location for the user. So a couple more things to add in here. We're going to need an image field, and this is just going to be a profile photo. Again, we'll have these for both the driver and the user. And I'm going to make a little change to the name. The reason I'm going to do that is at the very end, if you remember, I'd like to have a little screen that pops up and says thanks, how was your ride with, and then the driver's name. What I don't want to do is start giving out people's personal details by mentioning their full name. So I'm just going to change this. You could make it name, or you could make it first name. So I'm just going to make that first name. You could keep the full name if you really needed that for some reason. Perhaps if you were storing security details about people, but I'll leave that again up to yourself. Now at this point, there are a couple more things that need to go in here, but they are relationships, and they're relationships with a new collection, because the main collection that we're going to need here is called rides. Now, ride is the word I'm using, for, I guess, an alternative to a booking or ordering a taxi. It's essentially going to be all of the details of an in-flight request for a pick-up and drop-off. So a couple of things we need to do here. First of all, let's take the name and change that to ID. If you've seen any of my other videos on Adalo before, you'll know I quite frequently change the name field to the ID field, and it just creates a unique identifier that I can use to find and identify a unique role within a database. So what do we need in here? Well, let's start off with the basics. We need a relationship, and we're going to need that with users. So a user can make multiple rides, but a ride can only belong to one user. What we mean by that is a user is going to be able to book as many taxi rides as they like, one at a time, absolutely. But in theory, I can book one today, tomorrow, the next day, etc. So I can have multiple rides. However, each ride can only be booked by one person. You and I can book a ride to the same place, but it's technically still a different ride. And therefore, a ride belongs to only one user. You do have other options here, but none of them are relevant to what we are building. So we're going to create this one-to-many relationship, and we're going to call that requester. So this will be the person who requested the ride. And what I'm immediately going to do is pop in here, find the reciprocal field, and you'll see it's come up as rides. I'm just going to change that to be a little bit more descriptive. I'm going to call that requested rides. So this is a relationship that will store all of the requested rides the user has made, and of course, respectively, this requester field will simply note who requested this ride. But we need another relationship with users, although this is going to be in a slightly different flavour. This is going to be for drivers. So we are going to say, okay, that's a requested ride, but who is the driver for this ride? And of course, if we kind of sound this out again, a driver can have multiple rides because they might pick up and drop off several people in one day. Similarly though, a ride can only have one driver. Now that driver could change. You might find that a driver cancels and maybe switches to another driver, but ultimately at any one time a ride can only have one driver. Now it says user here, that's because we're referring to the user's database or database collection, but of course we know that that is going to mean a driver. So I'm just going to set that to driver. Scroll back up to the users, and again I'll have another reciprocal field put in here for rides. I'm just going to change that to driver rides. So that'll be, if I am a user who is a driver, so is driver set to true, then my driver rides includes all the rides that I have driven for, or essentially every day that I've picked up and dropped off. So if I pop back into rides, we're going to add a few more properties just to make this work. And essentially what we've got here now is, we've got all the basic details of the user in terms of address, where they're dropped off, etc. We now know who's requested a ride and who the driver of the ride is, although clearly the app logic will dictate the real user. This is just an empty data store at the minute. But now we just need to add quite a few fields in here to just give us context of where the ride is, when it's due, all that kind of thing. So the first thing I'm going to add in here is a date time field, and we're going to call this the requested time. In other words, when the user hits the pay now button, then what we're going to do is fill this field and say, right, okay, the user hit that at 12 PM, therefore the requested time of the ride is 12 PM, and that will just let us figure out when the newest rides are versus the oldest rides. So we've got our requested time. Now we're going to have to enter quite a few fields for the pickup and drop off address. Now the key thing to do here is to keep this in the same format as how you did your home address and your current address up in the users field. So what I mean by that is we've got a home street address, a home city and a home country set of fields, and therefore, what we should be doing in the rides is having a pickup street address, a pickup city, and a pickup country. Now, depending on exactly how you decide to set up your app, if you're only doing it in one city, this could be a little bit redundant, because if you're only allowing your app to operate in one city, then really the street address might change for the pickup or for the drop off, but the city is always going to be the user's home city. So, I'm going to add these properties in to sort of demonstrate the flexibility, but you do not have to do this if you're just aiming for one city. You can just have pickup street address and the drop off street address. Just add a few more details in here. We'll get the drop off city, and of course the drop off country. Now, nobody, I imagine, even if you are building a global app, is going to drive from one country to the other. Possibly if you were in Europe or something like that, where countries are all really, really close together. But what we have to do in the Google Maps is always have the street address, city and country information. So I just like to have it there so I know exactly what I'm putting in, because if I've got the street address, city and country, Google Maps cannot get the address wrong. So a few more fields we need to add, this time a few true and false fields. So this is where we're going to manage the state of our app. What do I mean by the state? Well, I mean, we have to answer several questions at all times when a ride is created. Has the driver picked them up? Has a driver even been assigned? Has the user been dropped off yet? Has the user paid for their ride? Is the ride complete? These are all the kind of questions that at any one time we might want to know, or we might want to specify about our ride, because that is then going to let us make further decisions. So I'm going to add one here which is called is driver assigned. Now, I like to phrase these as questions. You could just call it driver assigned, but I like to, when I do a true or false field, a true or false field can only ever be true or false, as you'll know from the No Code Fundamentals series we did on data types and variables. But I like to just phrase it as a question, well, is the driver assigned? A few other things we need to add in here. So, is the driver assigned? Okay, brilliant. What about is the ride paid? I might just put is paid there for a little bit of simplicity. Is paid. So that's simply going to tell us whether or not this little Stripe charge we've got over here, did that, is that confirmed or not? Because only once the user has paid for their fare can we then say, okay, let's go out and find a driver. We'll do is picked up. So this is a key part. In between this payment being made and in between the driver actually getting there, the user is not picked up, and therefore we have to make sure that when they are picked up, we correct this in the database and we now know that they're ready to go. We're also going to need is complete. So quite simply, has the user been dropped off? Because when the user's dropped off, the ride is complete. So we've simply got is complete. And then a few other little bits and pieces that we're going to need, and I did mention this is a big database table. We're going to need the estimated pickup time, because obviously we're using that on our ride confirmation screen. So we'll call this estimated pickup time. And we're also going to have, of course, our estimated drop-off time. And then a few little numbers we need to add in here. So I'm going to have the pickup time in seconds, and if you're wondering why I've got the pickup time in seconds alongside, just do pickup time in seconds alongside having the date, I'll show you a little bit later on, but essentially when we want to use this countdown module, we've got to put the number in on seconds, and so telling the countdown to count down from, I don't know, 20 minutes from now pickup, that's not going to work. What we have to do is just give it a number. We say, okay, 20 minutes is something like, I don't know, 1,000 seconds, for example, therefore count down from 1,000. The countdown converts that into minutes and seconds, and it goes from there. Just to give you an idea of that, if that doesn't make much sense to you, don't worry, it will when I actually show you on the workflows video later. So we'll just do drop-off time in seconds, And then two more. We're going to have here just a little number for distance. So that'll be sort of, you could call this miles, I'll just call it distance. So that's going to be a sort of count of the miles or the kilometres that the user's got to travel, or the driver's got to travel. And then we're going to have the fare. Again, I think I said this before in another video, I'm not sure if fare, for me, for some reason, that feels like a distinctly British word. I'm not sure if it is, it might not be. But fare, I really just mean like how much does the ride cost. And then one quick last database to add, much simpler one. We need to add a ratings database, obviously for this last screen. So we'll just do ratings. Instead of having a name, we'll have a unique ID for the rating. Why would you have a name for the rating, of course? We'll also add in a relationship with the users. A user can have multiple ratings, but obviously a rating belongs to only one user. You'll find this one-to-many relationship is the most common one that you use, and that's okay. And we don't need one for riders and drivers, because a rating is the same whether you rate a user or whether you rate a driver or whether you rate a rider. So don't worry about making a distinction. And then the last thing we need, of course, is just, well, what is the rating? Now we'll use workflows or Adalo actions to dictate that the rating can only be out of 5, but we don't need to specify that in the database, so don't worry too much about that. So there we go. We've just created our basic database. We've got all the details we need, like email, username, first name, etc. to get a person signed up. We know if they're a driver or not. We know where their home address is, so where do they start their day. We also know their current address. We've got various different items here, like profile photo. We've got a list of the requested rides. We've got, if they're a driver, we've got a list of the rides they're driving for. And of course, we've got ratings. And then similarly on our rides database, we have got all the information that we need here to successfully manage a ride, show where the driver is at all times, and really just do what we need to do. Now, there might be a couple of little fields that we end up putting in here where we go through and we build out our workflows, because as you know, occasionally when you're building something out, you're going to go, oh, I forgot this field, or I forgot that field, or it would make more sense to have this field. So, you know, we might add a couple of things in there, but broadly that's what our database is going to look like. As a slight preview, I can tell you that there is going to be one more little database collection that I'm going to add in here. I'm not going to do it yet because I'm going to explain it mid-workflows. It's just a really small collection. So there are changes coming to the database, but stay tuned in the next video for that. However, before we round this video out, I want to do a couple of things. Clearly we threw together our onboarding pages before we actually knew what our database was going to look like. So let's go ahead now and just tighten up this whole onboarding part, and we can also go ahead and make this profile work a little bit better as well. So a few changes I'm going to make on the sign up screen. Clearly it still says full name, although I've now changed this to first name. So the first thing I'm going to do is first name, and you can make that a question. You could say, what is your first name? So you can do that. And when the user hits sign up, let's just check what's happening there. So it's going to create the user, so it's going to sign them up, and then it's going to link to this onboarding page. Now on the onboarding page, what I want to happen here is we're going to update the now logged in user. And in terms of the fields, I'm going to change them around a little bit. So I don't need email, password, username, or full name, because I just collected all that. But what I do need now is the home street address. So I'm going to need that. I'm also going to need the home city, and I'm going to need to add a visible field of the home country. And if you're wondering what I'm doing, if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, definitely check out the basics of Adalo video. But essentially, visible fields are the ones that we want the user to edit. And then if we want to set anything automatically, then we can do that here. So what I'm going to set is the is driver field, and I'm going to set that to false. A couple of things to point out here. First of all, we always want to set a user as a driver to false by default, because this app is the rider app. If we want them to use the driver app, they can absolutely go and do that, and that is where we'll set this to true. But because this is a rider app, we're only going to set this to false. And by the way, remember, this database that we just made, it will replicate perfectly when we create another app. So all of this information will be taken over there. So we're going to set that field automatically. There's not really much else that we need to set in there automatically, at least at the minute. And so what we can do at this point is just double check where that submit button's going again, and it looks like it's going straight to upload profile photo. So now when we get to profile photo, we'll hit the final sign up button. We're going to add another action in here, this time to update the logged in user, because that image picker isn't part of a form, it's just an element I dragged on there. And all we're going to say is find the profile photo field and change that to take a form input, and that will basically let us take whatever the user has uploaded to the image picker, we will be able to put it right there. We can hit done, and of course that will take the user straight over to the home page. Similarly, if they come in, if they log in, that will also take them to the home page. So quite simply, we've just built our onboarding here. We're now collecting address information, we're grabbing the profile photo, and then we're going to bring them to their home page here. The interesting thing that will happen, that we'll start to look at in the next video, is clearly they'll then see their home address here on the map. So some interesting stuff like that coming up. But let's go ahead and just make some changes to the profile as well. Now, if you remember from the previous video, you can get to the profile by hitting this little button up the top left. And we've already designed this, so let's just make sure we're pulling the right data in. So if I click the image, add action, not add action, sorry, image source. And if I go to database and logged in user, I can select the profile photo. So that is now going to set the user's profile photo as this in this big kind of circle here. For the full name, I'm going to delete that text, and I'm now going to replace that with the user's first name. Where it says 10 rides taken, what I can do here is I can hit add magic text, and I can go to rides and I can hit count. So that's going to give me a number, and if I click this little pen, I can filter it. So right now it's telling me how many rides have been taken ever. What I want to do is go in here, I want to find the requester, and I essentially just want to make sure that that requester is me. So there are a couple of ways you can do that, but you can basically do if the requester's email is equal to the logged in user's email, then that will uniquely identify that you are the particular, or your user is a particular requester. And so what we've done there is we're now showing the total number of rides, but we're filtering that to only show the total number of rides taken by the user whose email matches the logged in users. And of course, you can only sign in with unique email at a time, and therefore that will show the current user's ride count. And then in terms of the ride rating, it'll probably make more sense once we actually start building this feature out. But essentially what we can do is, for the ratings, we can take an average of all the ratings a user has received. And you could do a sum or something like that if you wanted to do it differently, but you can take an average of all the ratings. Again, you can filter that where the user, so if you want to get the unique user, you can say, okay, well, filter it where the ratings belong to the user whose email matches the logged in user's email, which of course is the same person. And so therefore, what will happen is, and we'll show it a little bit later once we've actually went and taken some rides, but what will happen is this will show up the number of rides the user's taken, this will show up the average rating that drivers have given them, and then here in our ride history we'll be able to say, well, this is a list of rides. And instead of, under the title, instead of having a ride ID, we can change that data. So we can say maybe, we'll say drop off street address, so this is where you went. And for the subtitle, which is a little bit of text underneath it, I'll delete the word subtitle, and I'll maybe say, I'll put the requested time in there. Now, because this is a date, if you remember, requested time piece of data was a date time field, I can change the format, so I can leave it as relative, which means it will tell you the date relative to now. So it might be 10 days ago, 5 days ago, 2 minutes ago, whatever. I'm just going to put the date in, written down like that, so 7/31st, 2020. And you can put something in the left section. So what you could do, for example, is you could take the current ride's driver, so that will tell you the driver of the ride on the list, and you could hit the profile photo. Again, hopefully you've watched the basics of Adalo and you're kind of familiar with this, but the current ride essentially refers to the selected list item. It doesn't mean there's a ride ongoing, it means this is a list of different rides based on whatever ride I've currently selected for that ride. call that the current ride, go in, find the driver, pick the profile photo, and so that will show me who I've ridden with each time. Of course, you could set that to an icon or something else instead, but there we go. And then just one last thing that I think is pretty useful, if I drag this down a little bit, we'll just add in a button. And I'm going to call this button change address. You drag that out and you could put it wherever. I could put it under there, for example. And we'll give it a little home icon. So we're saying change address here, and what's going to happen is when the user clicks that button, I want to link to a new screen. And call this change address. As you might guess, I'm going to select the form. I'm going to hit create screen. Drag this up, grab the change address. And what we can do here is we've now got a form on the page. Which data collection? We're going to change users. We're going to update the logged in user. And what I'm going to do is delete all the fields it's got there, with the exception of the home address. I'll delete the current address. And so what I've essentially done there is I've now just created a quick form where the user can update their own address. Remember, the button's missing. If you remember from the previous video, that is because the fill color is set wrong. So if I set that now to, oops, sorry, that's the wrong, that's me editing the forms, apologies. If I go to the submit button, sorry, and edit the styles there, and select the fill as black, then the button will show up, and there we go. And so all that's going to happen is when the user hits that, it's going to update their home address with this action here, and then it's going to take them right back to their profile. And so really simply, we've just thrown together a database, we've just built the ability to log in, take all this information, show it on a profile screen, change address, and there we go. And so the only thing really left for us to do on this particular app is to build out this main workflow around about, picking a location, confirming the location, getting pickup, etc. And I think one thing just to bear in mind, I think the really interesting thing, the power about no code is, look how quickly we just threw together basic features like changing an address. I've been a programmer before, and I can tell you, if I was going into code that's probably a day's work there. Building a profile, building onboarding, easily it's probably going to take me a week if I'm doing that, maybe a few days less. I'm sure there'll be some programmer listening to this going, get a load of this guy, probably can't code. I've been doing it for a very long time, and this kind of feature in coding just takes so much longer to do, but Adalo makes it quick and easy, and I think that's worth bearing in mind. When you build an app out, you're always going to be able to build 80% of it really quickly with no code, much quicker than you could and much cheaper than you could with code. But as we go through the next section where it gets a little bit more challenging, bear in mind, some bits are going to take a little bit longer because they are more challenging, they are more intricate. Some bits are really easy and quick. So, don't get disheartened too much on the next video if you find it's a little bit complex. It's pretty simple once you see how it all fits together. And of course, building this app out, well, I don't know how long Uber took to launch, but I imagine it was something like a year. We're going to do this in a couple of hours, much quicker. Anyway, enough of a ramble. Jump on to the next video and we will start building out some of the interesting workflows that we've got here in this app.